You were never meant to hear this. The records were burned. The testimonies buried. And the men who witnessed it, some left medicine entirely. Because once you see a soul unravel in ways science cannot measure, you either destroy the evidence, or you go mad trying to explain it. In the frozen grip of January 1847, a woman named Latoya was dragged into the Blessed Mercy Infirmary outside Salem, Massachusetts. No one knew where she came from. No one knew her language. And yet, she knew everything. She knew the dreams of strangers. She recited names no one had spoken in decades. She predicted events before they occurred. And worst of all, she made the most rational men of her time question whether what they called madness was actually something older. Something sacred. Or profane. This isn't just history. This is a fracture in the system. A moment the institutions couldn't scrub clean. Because Latoya didn't just suffer, she disrupted. She shattered the illusion that man has dominion over mind and matter. And from the moment she arrived, that hospital never functioned the same again. The air changed. The light dimmed. Patients recovered or collapsed depending on how close they were to her bed. She didn't speak of God. She embodied something older than God. And it terrified the men in white coats. But here's the truth you were never supposed to know: every so often, something slips through the cracks of civilization, something untamed by scripture or science, and it challenges the gatekeepers of our reality. Latoya was one of those somethings. And what she carried in her mind, her memory, and perhaps her bloodline, was enough to make Harvard-trained physicians drop their scalpel, pack their belongings, and flee the state without ever explaining why. You're not watching a story. You're entering a suppressed timeline, a chapter of American history sealed in silence. But silence breeds rot. And today, we rip the veil. If you're still here by the end of this video, you won't be the same. This is forbidden history. And once heard, it cannot be unheard. You ready to fall deeper? They called it Blessed Mercy. But mercy was the last thing those walls offered. The infirmary stood like a fortress of order, brick, doctrine, routine, in a town still haunted by its proximity to Salem's old ghosts. Latoya arrived unconscious, half-frozen, with no family, no origin, and no explanation. She was wearing nothing but a threadbare dress, clutching a brass locket and a pouch of coins that didn't match any known mint. But what disturbed the staff wasn't her condition, it was her presence. Dr. Aldrich, a man of logic, dismissed her case as exhaustion. But within hours, nurses began reporting strange synchronicities. Latoya would awaken before anyone entered her room. She'd reach for water seconds before it arrived. She knew the names of the staff without introductions. That was the first fracture. Then came the language, words flowing from her mouth in a tongue that didn't match Latin, Greek, or any African dialect the doctors knew. Dr. Brennan, fluent in 7 languages, called it an amalgam of lost tongues. But the deeper mystery was this: when she spoke, others listened, without wanting to. A patient down the hall began drawing symbols he'd never seen before. Another awoke sobbing, claiming Latoya had walked into his dream and shown him a child he lost in 1829. None of this was in the records. Most of those would be burned. But one survived, a private journal locked away in an attic for over a century. It told of growing fear among the staff. Not fear of harm. Fear of awakening. Reverend Whitmore, the hospital's founder, insisted Latoya be moved to the chapel for spiritual cleansing. But after 1 hour with her alone, he emerged pale, trembling, and silent. He never returned. Here's the truth: Latoya's presence cracked something beneath the floorboards of authority, medicine, religion, and reason itself. And in the vacuum, something ancient stirred. A kind of memory older than the body. You see, every institution is built on a lie, that control is possible. That madness is random. That souls can be measured. But Latoya defied their metrics. She was a living rupture. And the moment they tried to treat her, the walls of that hospital began to crumble, not physically, but spiritually. This isn't about one woman. It's about what happens when power encounters something it cannot name, and instead of accepting mystery, it tries to kill it. And fails. By the third night, they stopped calling her patient. Privately, among whispers and exchanged glances, they began calling her the mirror. Because that's what she did, she reflected back truths no one wanted to see. Dr. Aldrich, a man who believed in structure, found himself avoiding her gaze. He'd review her notes obsessively, hoping the answers were in the data, but they weren't. Because Latoya wasn't a case, she was a phenomenon. During a routine check, she spoke to Nurse Halloway in perfect Gaelic. The nurse fainted. She hadn't spoken that language since her childhood in rural Ireland, and Latoya had never been told where she was from. A janitor later quit without notice after Latoya repeated, verbatim, the prayer he had whispered silently at his wife's grave. These were not coincidences. They were exposures. But it was the children's ward that changed everything. That part of the infirmary had been closed for years after a fire, officially. Unofficially, it was said that something darker had occurred. On January 23rd, the staff found Latoya standing at the sealed entrance, barefoot, her hands on the door. No one knew how she'd gotten there. When asked what she was doing, she simply said, "They're still waiting." That same night, several patients reported hearing children laughing through the vents. There were no children in the hospital. And then the drawings began. Patients began sketching intricate symbols, spirals, runes that matched ancient markings found in burial sites across West Africa and the Caribbean. None of them had ever studied archaeology. Dr. Brennan brought in an expert from Harvard, under the pretense of researching folkloric overlap. The expert never returned after his visit. He left behind only one note: she remembers the world before forgetting. That phrase echoed in the hallways long after. And here's the fracture no one talks about: the moment you realize your knowledge is the cage. Your beliefs? Designed. Your training? Filtered. The institutions you trust were built to keep your mind safe from the truth. But Latoya? She was the truth, unfiltered, raw, ancient, inconvenient. They couldn't drug her. Couldn't shame her. Couldn't explain her. She unwound them. Slowly. Quietly. Irrevocably. If you're still watching, comment below, "I remember the world before forgetting," twice. One for yourself, and one for the identity you're leaving behind. We're only halfway into the descent. On the morning of January 25th, something inside the Blessed Mercy Infirmary snapped. Not with noise, with silence. Deafening, pulsing silence. The clock stopped at 4:17 a.m. Not slowed. Stopped. Every watch, every pocket piece, every grandfather pendulum seized simultaneously, as if time itself had been put on pause. The first to notice was Sister Mary Catherine. She had been praying in the East Wing Chapel when the candle flames inverted, flickering downward. Her journal described it simply: light ran from her. Latoya, meanwhile, had vanished from her bed. Panic set in, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no footprints in the snow outside. Dr. Aldrich demanded a lockdown. Rooms were searched. Walls tapped for hollow spaces. Latoya was eventually found sitting cross-legged in the disused furnace room, eyes closed, hands open, the brass locket hovering an inch above her palms. The air around her shimmered like heat waves, though the room was freezing. When the doctors approached, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Dr. Brennan, against all logic, whispered, "We're trespassing on memory." And that's when the dreams began, not during sleep, but in waking hours. Staff and patients alike began hallucinating shared events, walking together through foreign jungles, chanting songs they'd never learned, witnessing a vast stone temple swallowed by vines. They saw a woman at the center of these visions, not Latoya, but someone with her face, speaking to crowds in languages long erased from history. These weren't fantasies. They were collective regressions, fractures in consensus reality. That's when the letters arrived. 7 envelopes, each postmarked from a different continent, all addressed to Dr. Aldrich, and all warning the same thing: do not let her remember. Who sent them? No names. Just seals bearing symbols that matched the drawings found under Latoya's bed. Symbols later confirmed to be from the Ifa cosmology, a West African system of divination so old, even scholars hesitate to date it. But how did Latoya know it? More importantly, how did we forget it? The answer is buried deep in the institutions that crafted our view of reality: churches, medical boards, universities. Their greatest fear isn't that you'll disobey them. Their fear is that you'll see them. That you'll see what was erased, who was silenced, and why. Latoya was never sick. She was silenced, because she remembered too much. By the end of that cursed week, the Blessed Mercy Infirmary was no longer a hospital. It had become a battleground between memory and suppression, between knowledge and control. Latoya's presence began affecting the architecture itself. Walls moaned at night as if under pressure, door hinges rusted overnight, and scripture hanging in the chapel peeled at the corners as if trying to escape their frames. And then the whispers started, voices echoing through the corridors when no one was speaking. Some staff claimed they heard their own names spoken in languages they had never studied. Others broke down completely, collapsing mid-task, eyes wide with recognition of truths their minds couldn't process. Dr. Aldrich documented it meticulously in his private journal, though even he began to doubt his own sanity. Latoya is not bringing madness. She is waking it, the madness buried beneath our illusions of order. The hospital's board demanded she be transferred, but there was nowhere to send her. No institution would accept a patient with no known diagnosis, no criminal record, and no observable illness, only psychogenic influence on group cognition, as one frightened reviewer put it. Then came the blood incident. A young physician named Emery Vale entered Latoya's room alone after hours, intending to take a sample without consent. He was found 2 hours later on the chapel floor, eyes rolled back, whispering equations in a lost tongue. Blood streamed from his ears, yet no injury could be found. He kept muttering a single word: Obatala. That name would echo throughout the investigation, baffling theologians and linguists alike. Only one person recognized it, a Haitian midwife living in Salem named Maman Delphine. When brought in to assess Latoya, she did not speak, did not ask questions. She knelt, placed her hand on Latoya's locket, and whispered, "You are the bridge." Then she wept. According to Delphine, Obatala is the Orisha of creation in the Yoruba tradition, the force of clarity, memory, and divine justice. Latoya, she claimed, was not possessed, but chosen, the embodiment of ancestral correction. She was a living key. But a key to what? To the vault of hidden history, the real timeline buried beneath colonialism, psychiatry, and piety. The reason even the doctors wanted to forget this case wasn't fear of madness, it was fear of truth. This wasn't a girl in need of healing. It was a mirror in need of breaking. The mirror cracked on the 30th day. That night, a winter storm slammed into Millbrook, winds howled like voices from beneath the earth, snow beat against the windows like skeletal hands clawing to get in. The hospital lost power, and all light extinguished, except from Latoya's room. Witnesses swore a pale glow radiated beneath her door, flickering like candlelight, though no flame was found. Sister Mary Catherine, compelled by what she described as a pull from the marrow, entered her chamber with a crucifix in one hand and a candle in the other. What she saw would later send her into complete silence for the rest of her life. She never spoke again. Dr. Aldrich, summoned by panicked staff, arrived moments later. Latoya stood barefoot in the center of the room, eyes closed, whispering in a cadence that did not match her breath. Symbols had appeared on the walls, not painted, not carved, but branded into the plaster itself as though the building remembered something ancient. She wasn't screaming, wasn't in pain, she was remembering. The locket around her neck glowed with a low pulse. That night, 3 patients passed away. All elderly. All near death already. But what startled everyone wasn't the deaths, it was the expressions. Every corpse bore the same look, peaceful, almost joyous, like they had finally remembered a secret they'd forgotten their entire lives. Dr. Brennan, now fully obsessed with Latoya's origins, returned to the Salem archives and uncovered a chilling connection. The town of Millbrook, originally named Marembe, a West African word for peace, was once home to a hidden community of freed slaves and spiritual practitioners in the 1700s, before being cleansed by Puritan militias. What they destroyed wasn't just people, it was memory. And now, that memory was returning. Latoya wasn't haunted. She was the haunting. Her body was a vessel, her presence a catalyst. She triggered remembrance, in the land, in the walls, in the souls of those near her. She wasn't the danger. We were. Because if her existence proved anything, it was this, that history is not written by the victors, it's buried by them. And when that history begins to rise, institutions tremble. Truth does not scream when it returns, it whispers, so only the prepared can hear. The morning after the storm, the hospital awoke to silence. Not the usual stillness of dawn, but something far deeper, a void where sound should be. Clocks had stopped ticking. Birds outside the frost-covered windows had vanished. Even the furnaces, which had finally begun running consistently, refused to ignite. And yet Latoya's room remained warm. Sister Mary Catherine, now mute and staring blankly from her cot, could not explain what she had seen. But her drawings, scrawled in charcoal on pages torn from a Bible, revealed a series of interconnected spirals and symbols, identical to those burned into the hospital walls. Dr. Aldrich locked them in his desk. It was no longer just a medical anomaly, it was something older, something the hospital itself seemed to remember. He began having dreams, vivid, overwhelming, and impossibly consistent. Dreams of hands reaching from beneath the floorboards, of sermons in unfamiliar tongues, of rituals performed beneath the steeple long before it ever became a house of healing. He stopped sleeping. Dr. Brennan, meanwhile, had made contact with a linguist at Yale who recognized some of Latoya's speech as Proto-Bantu, a linguistic fossil not spoken in any known modern dialect. But interwoven were fragments of Aramaic, Carib, even early Gaelic. Impossible, the expert had said. And yet she spoke them not with the uncertainty of study, but the fluency of memory. When asked how she knew these tongues, Latoya's answer was simple, because they were never lost, only silenced. On the 34th night, the hospital chapel burned. No source of ignition, no trace of an intruder. Just flames, pure, white, and silent. Witnesses swore they saw figures within the fire. Not shadows. Faces. Familiar. Ancestral. Unjudging. Dr. Aldrich tried to contain the panic by suggesting a faulty furnace line. But he knew. Deep down, he knew. This wasn't combustion, it was cleansing. A space that had once hosted forced conversions, spiritual erasures, and medical experiments under the guise of salvation, was now being reclaimed by something that could not be documented, could not be charted, and would never ask permission. The staff grew restless. Some resigned. Others became fervent, clinging to scripture like a life raft in a tidal wave. The split within the hospital widened. Some still believed Latoya was dangerous. But the truth was more dangerous than anyone dared admit. She wasn't casting darkness, she was revealing it. They tried to relocate her. Quietly. Discreetly. A facility near Boston, one with stronger theological oversight and stricter psychiatric methods. But the moment they loaded her into the carriage, the horses collapsed, not from fright, but from exhaustion, as if drained by something unseen. Latoya simply sat, eyes closed, humming a melody no one recognized but everyone felt. It stirred something ancient, something ancestral. And in that moment, even the most skeptical staff felt it, that she belonged to no institution. No nation. No century. She was a vessel of memory, of reckoning. Dr. Brennan, now gaunt and visibly shaken, begged Dr. Aldrich to let her stay. "She's not a patient," he whispered. "She's a mirror. And we're terrified because we recognize what we see." Latoya was returned to her room. But the town had begun to speak. Whispers filtered through Millbrook, of unnatural healings, of the chapel fire, of the woman who arrived with no past and stirred ghosts in the living. Local clergy demanded her removal. Parishioners threatened protest. One minister even labeled her the devil in brown skin, a blasphemy that said more about him than it did about her. Meanwhile, Dr. Aldrich had begun compiling his notes in a separate journal, a private, leather-bound ledger he never showed the staff. "There are truths here," he wrote, "that would destroy reputations, doctrines, entire disciplines. But they are truths nonetheless." He stopped attending morning prayers. He stopped defending the hospital's mission. His gaze had shifted, not toward heaven, but inward. Latoya was changing him. Changing all of them. On the 37th day, Latoya spoke a phrase to Sister Mary Catherine that would echo across decades. "You do not suffer alone," she whispered. "You carry the wound of those who were never buried." The nun collapsed, weeping, clutching a rosary that began to bleed from the crucifix, not red, but black, like ink seeping from old parchment. Dr. Brennan translated the phrase from a mix of Yoruba and Hebrew. It meant, literally, the grief that hides beneath history. That night, Latoya disappeared. No broken windows. No signs of flight. Just an empty bed, and the faint scent of burning myrrh. She was never seen again. But the hospital? It changed. Patients reported lucid dreams. Staff became gentler, less dogmatic. And in the decades that followed, the Blessed Mercy Infirmary quietly shifted its philosophy. Healing began with listening. With remembering. Because some wounds aren't healed by medicine, but by truth. Weeks passed, then months. The staff stopped speaking her name. Official records were redacted. Latoya became a silence that hummed through the halls, an invisible pressure, like a story you remember only in dreams. Dr. Aldrich sealed his private journal, locked it in a false panel behind the chapel's altar, and submitted a falsified report to the Massachusetts Board of Medical Oversight, patient transferred to family custody. No anomalies to report. But anomalies lingered. Patients described visions of women dressed in ceremonial robes standing at the foot of their beds. A newborn, delivered in the spring, bore a birthmark shaped like the locket Latoya once wore. A priest, brought in to bless the building, collapsed during the invocation, whispering a phrase no one understood before foaming at the mouth and dying within hours. His final words? "She is watching, still." And beneath all this, something deeper began to rise. Dr. Brennan stopped practicing. He moved to New Orleans, where he reportedly joined a secret society that studied syncretic religions and memory transference. Sister Mary Catherine left the convent and retreated to a cloister in Quebec, sending only one letter before her death. "She opened my eyes to a war older than nations." But Dr. Aldrich, he remained. Aging, haunted, writing. His notes, preserved only in fragments, reveal a man unraveling and awakening at once. He began to theorize that Latoya was not a person in the way we understand identity. That she was an echo, a sentient memory encoded through generations. A carrier of ancestral trauma, passed down not biologically but energetically. A spiritual contagion, not to destroy, but to remind. To reawaken. "We were never meant to forget," he wrote. What she carried was not a curse, but a ledger, and every soul who touched her had their page reopened. He died in 1879, alone in the chapel, surrounded by open journals. The hospital transitioned to state control a year later. No official trace of Latoya remained, except for one. In 1938, during renovations, a construction worker broke through the chapel's false wall. Inside, the sealed journal, the brass locket, and a final note penned by Aldrich himself: "If you are reading this, she is not gone. She is waiting for the world to be ready to remember." The final descent isn't thunderous. It's quiet. Like a breath held for centuries finally being released. And you, listening to this, you're now part of it. You've heard what others refuse to hear. You've seen the cracks in the story carved by power, by medicine, by faith. But Latoya wasn't a patient. She was a breach. A rupture in the veil that institutions were built to preserve. Not because of what she did, but because of what she revealed. She proved that the line between spirit and science, history and myth, identity and inheritance, was never real. It was drawn by men who needed control more than truth. The Blessed Mercy Infirmary may be gone, demolished in 1952, replaced by a shopping plaza where children now play. But the energy beneath it? Still pulsing. Reports of strange dreams. Shadows that don't belong. People waking with symbols drawn in dust across their mirrors. She never left. Not really. Because Latoya was not just one woman. She was a cipher for a lineage of forgotten memory, of exiled wisdom, of feminine power suppressed by centuries of fear. She was what the church feared. What medicine couldn't explain. What history tried to erase. And what you now know. So here's the question: what parts of you feel familiar now? What dreams have you dismissed as imagination, that might be echoes? If you felt the pull, if something deep in your blood has stirred while listening, then comment below with the phrase, "I remember the echo," twice. Once for the algorithm. Once for the awakening, because this isn't just a story, it's a mirror, and now, you're in it. Like the video if you're ready to uncover more truths buried beneath centuries of silence. Subscribe, if you dare, to keep descending with us, into the hidden, the forbidden, the forgotten. This is not entertainment. This is revelation, and you're now part of it. Candle, the past isn't dead. It's coded into you. She knew. Now, so do you.